do think people thought about smart contracts differently than they do now as well. I think there was like a lot less forking going on. There was a lot less, we can just add an opcode in this fork. Like we can just, change the address of the contract. Like there was some idea that you were working on like durable, long lasting, forever public goods versus now, I don't know if people think about it the same way. I think in some ways they do. In some ways, some projects are like less ambitious than that, which is like maybe reasonable.
On this episode, we talked with Jenny, who is an incredible developer. She worked at Metamask. She also did some work on Dapp Hub and was head of product at Aave. So this was a really fun conversation. Jenny has so much experience across the space. What stood out to you, Kevin?
Yeah, we had a lot of really good conversations about developer tools, account abstractions, touched on intents. There's just a wealth of knowledge that Jenny has that I felt super appreciative that she gave us her time and talked to us about it.
We ultimately came to the conclusion that having your own RPC endpoint as a user will basically be the new version of having a VPN. So definitely an episode that's worth a listen. Hope you enjoy. We are here with Jenny Pollack, who is the wearer of many hats across the Web3 ecosystem. Jenny, very excited to be talking with you on the pod today.
Likewise, thanks for having me on.
Before we jump into a bunch of different things that you've been thinking about, maybe it would be helpful to give some context on your background in terms of how you got into crypto and then also what you've worked on in the space.
Totally, yeah. I guess like the beginning of crypto for me, the really beginning was like I was on Beer Money, the subreddit, and I was like found out about Bitcoin faucets, but that is like way not how I actually got into the space. The real beginning was like I was living in Seattle. I was going to ETH Seattle meetups. I met the Metamask folks. They hosted an IPFS hackathon. At the time, I was working at Microsoft on OAuth and Exchange, and weirdly, like very relevant, like the same problems that I was working on there are like problems that have to be solved basically for wallets in crypto. So we always had a lot to talk about and always stayed in touch. And so after like 2 years at Microsoft, I decided to come over to this side of the tech space and then kind of haven't stopped since. So I was working as an engineer at Metamask and then did some like auditing with Dapp Hub for a little while. Then more recently, I was head of product at Aave, working on Go and Lens. And now I'm like kind of doing a small little consulting firm called Exonumia. We do like product strategy and network design and things like that. But it's very work in progress. Yeah. But I've been working in crypto, I think, since 2017. And still here, still along for the
so you've seen it all.
It really, really have. But I think also from like the application perspective in some way, or if like from the UX perspective, I like to be close to where the users are at. I think infra is important. I know it's like huge right now, but like, I don't know. I feel like sure we can do infra, but what's the point if no one's going to use it anyway?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a very grounding way to approach the space. It's very easy to get into like this circle jerk of intellectually interesting infrastructure and then never actually get into anyone using it.
Is it? Feels so removed.
No, it's not. It is.
But we are waiting. Like, I do get it. I get it because, like, without the infrastructure, it's really, like, still that. Like, infrastructure does make good UX at the end of the day. I just think sometimes we kind of over-index, or just because it's what still does need to be solved, we kind of spend a lot of time still working it out. But, yeah.
People would rather sell shovels than produce anything necessarily. I wouldn't say rather, but I think it can be easier at times.
It makes more sense to people. Like you can see why it's what people work on. I think incentive wise, like how the networks work, etc.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, I think it would be a good place to start is probably some of your work at Dapp Hub. Maybe you can start with just like a broad strokes overview of like what Dapp Hub was doing when you were there? Because I think it'd be interesting on the infrastructure side. I consider dev tooling infrastructure, but I think that's probably not actually fair to say. But I definitely want to dive into that. But first, maybe you can give context on what DappHub was working on.
Yeah, I think I agree with you though. I will say like I do think that dev tooling is infrastructure in a way. It's like the shovels that build the shovels, maybe, to go back to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, DappHub is like a really interesting. It's really hard to speak on behalf of. I wouldn't call my like I can't speak on behalf of DappHub. That's the way that it is. Like it's just kind of this thing that exists kind of still, but really existed at a time like basically the core development of Maker. So from like Psi to MCD, multi-collateral DAI, like they were kind of the main developers of that, the main architects of that system. And through that architecture and development created Dapp tools, which was like the foundation for basically, it was the first, I think, tooling that really let you write and test contracts in Solidity. So instead of, I think Truffle was kind of the other developer tool that was big at the time, which was like JavaScript. And it made sense. Like, I get why people use JavaScript tooling because you're making web apps for people to use. But like, I think the Solidity tooling is just a better experience, and separating like Solidity and smart contract development, which is so much more like hardware development, so much more like, formal specifications, formal verification, so much more like create it and it exists in perpetuity, or at least this is like the attitude that existed at the time that I do think is shifting. People are much more comfortable with like upgradable proxies and, V1, V2, V3, versus like the idea that you're working on this infrastructure as a protocol that should exist forever. It's just a very different way of engineering things. But anyways, like coming back to it, so Dapp tools kind of came out of the need to make developer tools for the development of the Maker stuff. And so, yeah, I think also just like as a little parallel, like that is usually where the best tooling comes out of. And that's also why I'm bullish applications, right? You have to use your own shit to know like what you need to build. Like there was a need for this tooling, and so it got built to service this need. And it's very specific, like make good Ethereum, make good, safe, robust Ethereum smart contracts. And now you get like really good tooling. And I guess like for people who aren't as old as I am, that's not the right way to say it, but like haven't been here for fucking ever. The dev tooling that people use now, which is really popular, is Foundry. And that's like what Foundry is based on Dapp tools. So which is really awesome. Actually, I'm really happy with the stuff that Georgios and co have been putting out, and like taking Dapp tools and making it more accessible, really, which is what I think they've done with it, which is awesome.
I'd say Foundry is like a spiritual successor in many ways.
100%. Yeah.
I think this call out around like moving away from kind of like you get one shot to get it right towards more upgradability patterns and like versioning is really interesting. What do you think changed over the last few years that caused that shift?
That's a good question. My first reaction is that it is like Web 2, for lack of a better term, Web 2 devs are used to iterating in development, right? You ship updates to traditional applications daily, weekly, right? We don't push the prod on Fridays, but we push the prod on Monday or whatever. Like you just iterate more quickly. There's always features to add. You take user feedback, you integrate it into your web app, and you ship a little update. So that paradigm, I think people are comfortable with it. It also makes sense, right? Like software is hard to get right. If you don't spend a million years like architecting a thing, thinking through every edge case, really planning how the thing is going to work, like you're going to want to change it. And that's still true. Like there's always things about systems that get deployed that you probably want to change. And so I think in some way, people are just being a bit more realistic about that. Like it is really hard to sink, 4 years of development time to make something. Does it have its pros? I honestly do think yes, but it's like much less accessible. It's much more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. I do think people thought about smart contracts differently than they do now as well. I think there was like a lot less forking going on. There was a lot less, we can just do we can just add an opcode in this fork. Like, we can just, change the address of the contract. Like, there was some idea that you were working on like durable, long-lasting, forever public goods versus now, I don't know if people think about it the same way. I think in some ways they do. In some ways, some projects are like less ambitious than that, which is like maybe reasonable, but like, I don't know, like Maker's vision was to create like literally like a new global reserve currency, right? I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on the internet, but like, um, that's what they're trying to do, and like replace a global financial system. And it's a really bold thing to attempt. But to do that, you have to do all these things that they did, which is like make it safe, make it robust, make it, enduring. And that's probably part of it as well. I don't know. I think now I'm just in like speculation territory, but I do think like people being used to like faster development cycles and then just like, I don't know, different ideas of what we should make.
It's definitely, yeah, I think we've seen that pendulum swing. When Web3 was new, there was this new way of creating entirely immutable applications. And we got a lot of things like Maker that came out of that. And then a lot of, like you said, a lot of Web2 engineers came into the space, kind of continued the existing paradigm that they were used to. And I think there's sort of this middle ground that we talked a little bit with Steve Klebanoff from Party DAO yesterday about this pattern of these immutable contracts that you can opt into an upgrade. You see with things like Uniswap where there's, V1, V2, V3. And each one of those can't be upgraded until people decide to go ahead and use the next one. So I think, yeah, there's definitely this this spectrum, I would say, in the space, and it'll be interesting to see how different types of applications land into different niches.
I also think, like, in this context, something that feels like it stands out to me. I mean, first of all, I like effectively, they don't build them like they used to. Like, that's kind of the vibe. But also, it feels like so much of the infrastructure that exists now is just like kind of handed to you as opposed to like needing to build these systems. And to your point, Jenny, about like forking, I am curious how you think about, from a perspective of like culture, I guess it's kind of culture, like how okay it is to fork stuff and what that looks like. Because I think a few moves by Uniswap and others over the last like couple of years have definitely made like whether or not it's fine to fork stuff and to what degree you can just fork shit and change the name like you're talking about and just sort of move on. Like how okay that is feels like a thorny topic. And so I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my perspective and like one of the things that attracted me to crypto or like generally whatever we call what we work on these days, in the first place was this kind of idea of like free and open things. And like to me, like the free and open source software movements and things like this are foundational to kind of the work that we're doing. And so for me, forever, I think forking is good. I think it would be hard to convince me that it's a bad thing. I think, and the reasons are because I think I believe that this stuff needs to be open. I believe that it needs to be accessible. I think the other end of the spectrum, which is like kind of what you're talking about with, permissive licenses or what have you, I also can understand and empathize with that position, right? Like I've worked on labs teams. I understand in a way, like what you're trying to do by doing these things is probably building this more like institutional long view type of enduring community, right? The reason that I think we are like somewhat accepting of some of these things that are happening in the short term is because, or like if you probably have like some belief that Uniswap Labs, for example, is set out and aligned with you to build enduring public goods infrastructure. Not to call them out specifically, but like that it is a good example. Like, so I think that's the spectrum, right? It's like, to me, I'm like, this should be free. Everyone should be able to learn how to use it. That's one of the things, that's why I started programming in the first place. I was like, oh, you can like learn how to program on the internet. Like, that's cool. No one can tell you need like whatever to do this, like that's awesome. Those have always been the most interesting things to me, is just like it's still not accessible to everyone, right? Like reliable internet, like access to, honestly, the English language is hugely a barrier for some people in this. But like, I don't know, just the idea that like you can access this information, this knowledge free. Knowledge should be free to me. Like information doesn't make sense why we withhold this from each other. We're just holding ourselves back. Like fully on that spectrum of like openness, never been against it. But then like, okay, we also like live in a society, huh? But like you just like, you need to make things that last, and often things that last are institutions or organizations. So like I get both sides, but I'm definitely like a free software maxi in that way.
Yeah, it also feels like definitely like the openness of this ecosystem in general feels like it catalyzes a lot of the innovation and just like what people can create that's net new, because you're not like basically reinventing the wheel every single time. Which kind of makes me wonder, so like you kind of mentioned the upgradability patterns is changing and things like that. I'm curious, when you think about the way that the ecosystem has evolved over the past few years, it's specifically in like the dev tooling side of things. What's changed? Like what feels like it's net new and exciting? Maybe even now, maybe not even like, what's changed since then, but to you, what feels most exciting on the dev tooling side of things moving forward?
I think I mean, it's like funny to say test nets maybe, but like test nets are my favorite dev tool, because it's just like similarly the same way. Like it's, I mean, the crazy things that happened with the girly like price, whatever, like that was actually, I could have never I would have never predicted that really somehow, but like, and that has changed it a bit, the game, I think, but like test nets, I think is the best, is like an amazing dev tool. What else? I don't know. I think some of the stuff like the like transaction simulation, just like explorers, like I think again, like for me, it's like giving people tools, which is information, contextualizing information, like those types of things I really like. And I think we have like good dev tools, honestly. Like if you're like programming, I mean, I don't know if they're like amazing dev tools, but they're pretty good. Like you can ostensibly like write contracts, you can deploy them, you can fork locally, like that's like covered. And then I don't know, I think it'd be cool to see more like, I think I'm trying to meme wallet as a service into existence. I know some people are working on stuff similar to this, but like I think giving application developers the ability to play more with like what actually like wallet infrastructure would look like, or just like signing infrastructure, I would like to see more of that. I think that would be interesting. Also, as we like are working towards some of this other stuff like account abstraction and intents and stuff, like I think that's a place where some infrastructure, maybe dev tooling, is like missing. Like the like cast, which is the Ceph like command line tool for like publishing transactions, signing transactions. Like the space between that and like MetaMask and like whatever is next, like I do think that's pretty wide. I know that it's hard to get like funded in some way, I guess, and maybe that's why we haven't seen it, or like hard to get it specified, but or people are all just like waiting for everyone to agree on what the standards are. But that would be something that I think would be cool to play with. And I think there's a lot of like UX stuff that could come out of that. It's like not dev tooling, but like what is like the playground for users, which is like also dev tooling, but like a little, it's like tools that let you play with things in like a low risk way for not only specifically devs. That is a category that I think is interesting. And I want to know more of these tools if you guys, I mean, your permissions explorer actually, I think is a fantastic example of this, not to like totally do that, but it totally is. Like I think letting people see how things work together, see how things are related, like how to verify these things, like all very useful and all very necessary, right? When you're in this, honestly, like very still hard to totally get your head around space.
I love the pod.xyz shill for anyone who doesn't know what Jenny is talking
Yeah,
about.
sorry, yeah.
But also, I'm
Pods.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, we're just shilling at this point.
Pods.
But I do think like I think that's a really good call out, and I do want to double. Oh, I can't say double click. That's too.
Say it.
That's too cringe.
Say it.
I want to
don't say
dive
it. Don't say
deeper into the
Okay.
account abstraction side of things. I mean, it sounds like from your perspective, from the perspective of just account abstraction adoption, part of it is just like waiting for standards. Do you think that's the main thing that's holding this all back?
I think it's that. I think it's also like the wallet, or however we want to call like the end user interface to it. Like it's gonna be hard. The proposed like whatever 4337, I always get these numbers confused. They're like, but 4337 spec, which is like you get a new mempool, you can upgrade any EOA to an account, a smart contract account. Like it all like sounds reasonable, but I think if you like look at like how user patterns have gone, like it's really hard to get people to like upgrade their behavior unless they have like a really good reason to. And I'm probably, would I make this bet? I think we probably haven't done a good enough job of like selling people on the benefits. Like, are we going to get these people to upgrade? They don't already, like, my other thing is like Ethereum specifically. I mean, account abstraction is not a new concept. It exists in other ecosystems besides Ethereum. It exists in the, like, in tech in general. Like, these things are, it's just like a way of dealing with things, just like an abstract layer above what you were doing before. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a silly name in some way. But anyways, I think that the Gnosis Safe is arguably Ethereum's account abstraction, and it's not everyone is using that for good reason. You know, it's more expensive, whatever, but you're still going to incur these costs to get people to upgrade to this new infra. So, and it will depend on the tooling around it. Like if there's not a one-click way, I think there's a new one that like clients put out. Like this one, I have to look at the number, but I did write it down because I thought it might come up. 7377. I think it's relatively new, but it's just like a way for like one-click migration. I'll just show that really quick. I think people should go read it and give feedback on it because I think it will be helpful. But yeah, like there's this assumption that we've made that like people will understand the benefits of this thing and thus upgrade their systems. And like, I don't know, I think there's a lot less just like for wallets, there's a lot less reasons why they might do it. Like you're going to incur a ton of development costs. I think it's possible if someone does it really well, you would see like an upseating of like some, what do you call it? Like untrenching of the whatever, like usurping of existing big players. Like I think there's a chance there for this, but I'm not like fully convinced it'll happen. But there is that opportunity because we do have to like kind of rethink how we do accounts and like what people. I think Intense is actually going to be like a bigger shakeup if this meme takes off at a user level, or if there's like actual infrastructure to support it. Like something that I think is cool that doesn't exist, I think we will see, is just like prompt. Like everyone's saying like, you know, prompt engineering for transactions, but like there is this like idea that you can just like ask more generally like for things, Ethereum transactions aside. Like that is an interface that I do think people are more comfortable with and like want to use. Like I think one of the reasons that like ChatGPT or whatever has been popular is because you can just kind of play with the idea of like, oh, I could get what I want. I can see if I can get what I want through this. And I do think seeing at least even just how I've tried to use it, I'm like, I want to make this thing work for me in this way. And I would love to see interfaces like for this type of stuff that work in a similar way of like, I don't know exactly what I want, but I have some rough idea. How close can I get? And that's layered on top of all these like low level, like whatever intense account abstraction things, right?
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to dive deeper into some of the like technical aspects of account abstraction. But before we do that, everyone seems to have a different definition of what intents actually are. And so I'm curious how you would define intents.
Okay, I have a it's not my definition, but Christopher from Monoma has it, and I think his is the best one that I've seen so far. And I want to pull it up because I don't want to misquote this. But I probably am going to struggle to find it. Ugh, okay. I'm going to try because I can't find it right away. I think I took a picture of it, but he was basically saying just like, okay, what are intents? Intents are basically, I don't know, it's like the thing that stuck out to me though was like he made explicitly clear that they're over a specific domain. And so I think that's like really important in intents, is to remember that they're over a specific domain. I think eventually we'll see the specific domain kind of expand to be like any type of multi-chain EVM, non-EVM thing. But it's just like, to me, an intent is just an abstraction above a transaction. So it's just like, I want to do X. That's all it is. It says nothing about its implementation. It says nothing about how this actually gets facilitated. It says nothing about the system that it works in. But it's just like a desire expressed over a domain, I think, is kind of like a way to say it. But I think everyone does have different ones for different reasons. It's lossy enough that you can fit a lot inside of it, which is hard, but I don't think the wrong thing, if that is fair to say.
Yeah, I think that was a pretty solid definition. I like that. I think account abstraction has taken a while. It's been talked about since like basically the very beginning of Ethereum. And so I think one of the reasons why that's the case is this sort of chicken and egg problem, where we need to see examples of this to know what sort of standards we should establish. But at the same time, like, not many people want to build those specific implementations until we see more standards. So what do you think? Like, we're slowly moving in the direction of figuring out all these details. What are those details that you're excited about? And you mentioned 7377 as like one example that you wanted to get people to give some feedback on. What's the interesting pieces that you see within account abstraction?
I think so. The one that's been tried before, I guess, is like the meta transaction relay networks. And I do think, as far as I like understand, I think one thing is like, I don't know how many people, and I would count myself in this included, like, do I really understand the 4337 spec? Like, no, probably not. Like, does any, like, I don't know. I feel like it's almost like it's the same thing with like intents or whatever. Like, the definition of what we actually mean when we say the thing is like actually hard to pin down. I think that's a byproduct of kind of working on user experience of distributed systems. So that's like a fun challenge, right? That's our coordination problems all the way down. But I do think this one, as I understand it, it like kind of proposes this user operations mempool, so that we all like, and how that like is actually going to work. Like for MEV, like transactions with value, I think it still will work, right? Like people will still do MEV on that, which means people will still be incentivized to like run infrastructure for these networks. I think somewhere where we might see this be more difficult is things like, I don't know, like for when I was working on Lens, like a social network, like there's not a ton of like incentive for anyone in a gasless way to submit transactions. So how do meta transactions work for non-financial transactions is almost even the wrong word when you talk about like social, but that's what they are like at the technical level. But like they're just, they're user operations, which actually is what I think the thing is called in the spec, which is good. But the incentive to publish them and to like validate them is like much, much less plumbed through. So that's like something that I don't know if I'm excited about it, but excited to see if we can figure it out. And then, yeah, I don't know. I do think it's like going to be a wallet game though. Like this stuff, what we're talking about, wallets, connections with RPCs, connections with new mempools. There's a lot of this infrastructure that does exist already. It will be kind of up to some of them to push, I think something that is funny, and I guess like one of my final boss in crypto, I guess if I can solve this one thing, I'll be able to leave, is that when I was working at Metamask, the one of the first things I did there was make a branch of Metamask that has a Gnosis safe inside of it. We never shipped it. And one of the reasons we didn't is because I made it as a one of one. So it supported like one of one M of N multisig, but just one of one. And at the time we were like, oh, but like people want to use like 204 or 305. And now, actually, 1 of 1, most popular configuration of a Gnosis safe. Could not have known that at the time. I didn't think that that's how it'd be. But now, like, that type of thing, I think makes more sense. People were sold on that. People wanted a way to recover their own keys, and we're not getting it at the protocol level. That's like an important distinction, I think, between Ethereum and like some, like Polkadot, for example, has like many different types of accounts, like in the runtime, already has existed for a while. You can vote with like a specific key. You can do meta transactions. Like there's a lot more infrastructure around this in like other ecosystems. But for Ethereum, I think Vitalik talked about it at ECC. They just were like, we need to ship this thing. And that's super valid. But it has come back to, I think, bite us a little in this way. But yeah, I don't remember where I was going with that. No, still don't. Okay.
The final boss.
Yeah, that's my personal battle, but yeah. So I'm excited to see it so that I can finally put that to rest, I guess.
Well, I hope it gets solved, but I also hope that's not the moment that you leave. I think.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's the wrong. That would be
did.
ridiculous. That would be ridiculous.
Wrong incentives. I mean, I think these things needing to exist at the wallet like level is interesting. I'm also curious how much of this is like an application level issue, because you do have like this question of like which RPCs applications are directing you towards, which I know there's like, I'm not well versed on this, but I know there's definitely conversations around like basically like a universal RPC for like cross-chain stuff, which seems partially like a wallet thing, but it does seem partially like an application thing. So I'm curious how much you think this stuff falls on applications versus wallets.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like kind of also like calls back to what you said earlier about like how now the infrastructure has been built, like not by, like instead of needing to build the infrastructure as you build the application, some of it exists and you can kind of pull off the shelf. And I think like that actually is like a killer application at the infrastructure level, is this like universal RPC. I think there's a couple that exist, but the challenge of applications is like, which integration do I choose, right? And that's always like a total separate thread, but like always kind of a fun conversation to try and have it. Is this project going to last long enough for us to use it? Is it going to become abhorrently expensive? Should we build it in-house? Those are questions that all basically labs teams ask themselves. But yeah, that universal connectivity layer is going to be totally key for this to happen. Also for like, EVM and non-EVM chains. Like is account abstraction even the right abstraction? It's probably something above that. That's why people like intents, it's because it is that kind of like arbitrarily execute anywhere defined domain. But yeah, I don't think those exist. I don't think they're robust today. I do think there's still challenges there. And it's because it's like a huge DevOps. It's like, it's just hard to do, right? There's so many, you don't know what people are going to do. You don't know where they want to do it. You have to basically build 100 integrations inside of one integration. I think people have this issue, like integrating with custodians, for example. Like, is it one thing or is it 10 things that need to happen? Like, yeah, this is where decentralization, I think we use it as a like we index on decentralization, but what we've just ended up with is actually fragmentation. Like, I think they're really different things, but we really are like, oh, it's decentralized because you can do literally maybe anything, but we don't actually know if it will work. So yeah, I guess I'm like anti-fragmentation, but still pro decentralization. That's tough though to get right. I don't know if anyone's really, yeah, I'm curious about that space, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance to strike, because too much fragmentation doesn't really improve decentralization. It if anything, at times can make things worse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also curious from like the perspective of being at Aave. It feels like part of the dynamic here is also that you definitely need like a sufficient number of applications with a large amount of users to kind of lead the way and set the example so that everyone else does it. This is kind of getting back to this chicken and egg problem around standards. And it feels like for a labs team like Aave, you tend to have a lot more say then in, what actually ends up being implemented in an app. And so I'm curious from that perspective how you thought about where you should double down and build your own, versions of things versus being like, okay, no, we're gonna just go ahead and say that this makes sense to implement here, and hope that other applications basically follow suit.
Yeah, I think probably this is like a really interesting thing, right? The starter pack of applications required to bootstrap a new ecosystem, right? That's like kind of what it is, right? Is there sufficient application infrastructure, etc., to like move to a new place or like? But I think for the bigger or like longer term, longer looking applications that have been in the space, I'm pretty sure all of them have gone down the path of totally using some integrations, but a lot of time figuring out like how to build them themselves because you just like not that Aave did this that often really, but just like the idea, I think for Lens it was actually like much more we worked with teams to build specific solutions because they didn't exist yet. And we did do like a lot of in-house stuff in that way, but like there's some like general pattern, like an RPC is a good example of something you might not need to build in-house, right? Just like a connection to a blockchain is pretty reasonable, but like the even indexing, right? Like you're sharing these resources and like you can just build like a better, faster thing like inside. I mean Paradigm, I don't know what it's called, but they built some good indexing. Oh no, Josh at Lens did it too with them, I think on Red. But anyways, you just like when you have users, you can like build better stuff because you know what's happening or like you know what you need. So I don't know. It's really there's some things that don't make sense. I think like compliance is something that people want to offload. Um, generalized infra I think makes sense. I think we will see more like vertical integrated stuff though. In general, I think these applications are going to move into more like, here's the experience I will provide, high touch, well plumbed UX. I know what end users want better. Not better, but like I know what end users want and I can provide it well for them. And then you'll have kind of this like long tail of like all this other stuff where it's like more hobbyists or whatever cobbling together their own things. But if you want to really do distribution, you kind of infrastructure is generic, distribution is really specific, and so it's hard to be good at both.
What do you mean by distribution
Probably.
in this context?
I mean like user-facing applications or like actual end users distribution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is still should be the goal, but yeah, the infrastructure providers understandably, and I think wallets, I consider them a bit of an infrastructure provider. Most of them want to be generic now, right? You don't want to tie yourself to like a specific implementation. That's also why I think, I mean, to go back to that question about like what's it gonna take, this standardization, like you don't want to, at MetaMask, probably the Gnosis thing, it was like a bad timing thing. And now maybe it would be more reasonable, but now they're working on kind of this platform for anyone to build wallet integration. So like, yeah, it probably would have been like too early to build like a really specific integration inside. I don't know. But I think that's a question that everyone is going to be asking themselves is like, when do you move over? And I do think, again, like I do think the applications can ask for it, but since they don't at the end of the day control that end user piece, they aren't the one that kind of like is the touch point for most users in most cases today, that it will require this wallet piece that you don't control as an application. So that's why I think we will see more vertical integration, but I think we are in kind of like a messy middle where no one really knows what move.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting dynamic where like wallets are in and of themselves kind of a distribution mechanism in the sense that they are the highest touch with users over applications. Which is a strange dynamic for application developers as well. When you say vertical integration, do you mean like you could see applications building their own wallet experiences?
Totally, yeah. I think yes, basically that. Yeah. Probably more though.
Interesting.
Like it's probably I think it will feel not like a wallet experience though, I guess is it won't feel like how it feels today. It will feel like you're in the, you know, I was gonna say X app, but you can't say that anymore because there is an X app
Yeah,
now.
that's scary.
That's okay. You're in an application and like you just use it and it feels much more like how I don't know, in a way it's siloed, right? But I think this is again the fragmentation versus decentralization. It's okay to have like fragmented apps. I use different music apps for different things I want to listen to. That's not totally foreign. Um, it's probably not great. Like I still probably am more app centric than like an average individual, I guess. But like I kind of think that is where it has to head.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see this pattern time and again where we need um, the ultra generic version. We need like a browser before it makes sense to start building individual apps, or we need an ether scan before we build the like super opinionated podarchy viewer. And so I think you're probably right where we needed this more generalized type of wallet application before we can start to see these like um, vertical integrations between the wallet and the application, stuff like the Uniswap wallet, or even like more specific to a type of application. Are there other examples of sort of these like the use case for vertical integration of an application tied to a wallet that you're interested in?
Um, yeah, I think one that has always been like a use case to me is just like um working with like groups that are kind of so I've been working like in the past a bit with Centrifuge as well, and their problem space is like their user base is a bit more like institutional, like real world traditional finance coming into DeFi. I think they've straddled that bridge like from the beginning, and I think that they've really thought about the product from this way. And so like one of the problems that they have, or like one of the solutions that would work really well for them is like the ability to, restrict where you can send certain types of coin to, right? Like if I want to invest USDC into these pools, I only really want anyone who's executing these transactions to be able to interact with that type of thing. So that, for example, would be like a really specific wallet as a service thing that like you would build now as like smart contract code or whatever, but like eventually I think could be more generalized as like, you know, this is like a wallet that makes sense for institutions. I mean, Fireblocks does similar stuff, right? Like you can only send USDC to X, Y, and Z address. Like you can only, this is Gnosis safe daily like spending limits as well. You can only send X amount of funds to these things. Like those types of controls, I think, are really important for the more financial stuff. What else? I think there's a cool use case of Lens of account abstraction, which is like just like abstract that to like any social kind of thing is like group ownership of an account. This happens in like traditional social media where you just like all use TweetDeck or like share the password or whatever and like are all posting. Like these types of things are when you're using just like cryptographic keys, like you need a good way to share access and like have control over that access. And so that is like a practical application, not super sexy, but like it is limiting us in some way of like not being able to do this elegantly, not being able to do it in a standardized, learnable, observable way. Yeah.
Yeah. It,
I was gonna say, I mean, I'm gonna ask a dumb and annoying question, which is basically like, I'm curious how you think about the dynamic between account abstraction and intents and basically anything where you have like off-chain actions going on. And the dynamic between that and like how sufficiently decentralized these things need to be. I feel like the unspoken truth of a lot of this stuff is just that like most infrastructure is actually not decentralized at all. And so like even with something like Gnosis, you can have everyone sign but the reality is like if the bundler service that Gnosis runs is not submitting those transactions and making sure that they're executed, like it's not happening. And so I'm kind of curious how you think about, in the context of like controls, you definitely have much more granular control over what's possible, but also some of that does introduce a centralization risk that it feels like we don't talk a lot about. And so I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's fully not solved, like even close. I think what you're saying is 100% true, and I think will persist for a while. I do see though some of like DAOs, for example, or like these communities where you have like a specific protocol that people interact with, like they might have to be standing up their own endpoints for these things, right? Like the censorship resistant piece of this is just like you should be able to like fall back to like I don't know, this is again like the free and open source software thing. You should be able to run your own thing. I think it's the reason I'm like kind of speaking about this really slowly is because I don't think it's realistic to have like an end user, instead of getting censored, like go to GitHub, download some repo, yarn start, whatever, like hook up like their API keys. Like I don't think it's realistic. So I'm hesitant to be like, oh, that's a solution, right? That's a horrible solution. It's technically sometimes possible if you literally have the best docs ever and like really practice and try it out yourself and like make sure it will work for someone on like a shitty internet connection, right? We're so far away from that. I do think though, like as a baseline, we should say everyone needs to have that as the worst case scenario. That doesn't even exist today as the worst case scenario. That's still not possible today for people. I think that there should be something where we're just like, okay, committed to at least that. But for sure, I think there needs to be so much more. Once it starts to like make the incentives make sense, like the apps will do, this is maybe a vertical integration piece. The app will include you. That will get into interesting compliance things like, like some of these apps run checkers against the OFAC list, for example, like, so they can still block your access. They do location checks, right? They can still block your access. So like solving those things, I don't know. I do think like the local first solution is probably like, if you really want to make it hardened, probably the only way. But like, I think the intermediate step is going to be that there's like kind of these applications will like make sure you're included, that type of thing. If I build a tight Gnosis safe integration, I'll run a relay too kind of vibe.
Yeah, it seems like perhaps the equivalent today is like users knowing that they need to have a VPN. They don't really know what's going on, but they know they're blocked from accessing certain things because they don't have a VPN. And so when you set up a VPN, you're like set. Having your own endpoint feels like maybe a similar dynamic where like you could probably make that very easy for a user and not everyone's going to use it. But for the people who do need it, it's a sufficient solution to ensure censorship resistance.
Yeah, and this even goes back to the beginning of the conversation about forking, right? Just having the ability to fork can sometimes be enough to change the incentives and prevent extraction from happening in the first place. Just be like, even though I might not necessarily set a custom RPC in Metamask, knowing that I can if Metamask decided to start censoring, that sort of like probably does a lot to stop MetaMask from censoring in the first place. Not that they would necessarily have the incentives to otherwise, but like I think all of this stuff kind of comes full circle when just giving the ability to exit to everyone is sort of like a default option.
Totally. I think that's a really good point.
Oh, I love getting into this like interesting mix of infrastructure and like decentralization philosophy stuff. I think is very interesting. I guess one final question for you, Jenny, before we wrap things up. What are you feeling most excited about that's happening right now? It seems like the account abstraction stuff is moving in a direction that feels good. But we're kind of in like, a little bit of a lull in the space right now. And so I'm curious what you're feeling excited and energized by.
I think privacy tech is something that I'm excited about. I think you're starting to see more people, like the resurgence of people caring about it. That we have like better tooling, I guess, for getting it built. I'm definitely not an expert. But I do think it's necessary. I almost feel like when I first started in crypto, I was really, really impatient. I was just like, why doesn't this work yet? And now I'm like, okay, we're working on account abstraction right now, but like that will lead us to, whatever. And like, I don't know, I guess I still think it's necessary privacy for like a lot of this stuff to literally make sense for real people. So that still keeps me excited, I guess. But otherwise, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it still feels like important. It still feels like, I guess the battles feel more like regulatory right now, or like much more like, not that, yeah, which sometimes feels like a bit fake. Like, I don't know, these like stuff that's happening, it feels more arbitrary than it did before. And it feels like the tech is getting built, and it feels like people that are building the tech are kind of understanding the tech that's getting built. I hope that people don't stray from this like ideology, I guess. Like, if we only build the tech and it ends up being like a worse version of what we had before, like, I think it is a failure. But I still think people are around for like the right reasons. So I think that keeps me excited, I guess.
We're still so early.
So
Oh,
early.
really?
Incredibly
What are you guys
bullish.
excited about?
Good question. Go ahead, Chase.
I've been diving into Intense. I definitely think it's particularly around the perspective that we were talking about with like, it introduces levels of centralization, but it does feel like people need to understand that in order to understand like potentially net new types of business models that we seem to have just kind of ignored, which is more my like, like non-technical business schooly type hat. But I do think that is something that feels really exciting to me. Kevin, what are you excited about?
I think the thing that keeps me around in the Ethereum space is just the fact that like every direction you turn is a nerd snipe, and you can go fall down so many rabbit holes, and every single direction that you look is like super dense, and it's hard to even point to like one thing that I'm excited about at any particular moment. I definitely share your enthusiasm around account abstraction. I think that's going to unlock such a better user experience, which will unlock a larger onboarding funnel. I think just general excitement around increased block space through L2s. It's interesting to see this conversation right now on Twitter around like, there's a lot of L2 FUD at the moment. So I'm interested to see how this shakes out. And yeah, I don't know. This space keeps me constantly engaged. And I don't know if it's like the ADHD or if it's just a wildly fascinating space, but I'm here for it.
That's the perfect way to put this space in general. I don't know if it's the ADHD or just there's always stuff going on, but I'm engaged. I've been engaged for too many years. Jenny, this was such a lovely conversation. Where can people learn more about you and the work that you've done and are doing in the space?
Probably on Twitter, I guess. Also my website, jenny.lol. Check it out. It's not good, but I like the domain.
Nice.
It is a good domain.
Needs an update, but the domain is forever.
All right. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so lovely.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me. Nice chatting for sure.
Appreciate it, Jenny. Thank you.